Good to have Russell Lamberti in studio this time. You were telling me earlier that the last time we spoke was the very first time we used our new business studio.
Great to be here, Alec. Yeah, thanks for having us. I think it was the first time. It was around about December. You guys had just moved in.
Yeah.
It's like you're going from strength to strength here. So.
Oh, it is interesting. And well, the offices are now getting filled with people, which is always a good sign.
Great
and
stuff.
Tiaan Alberts is with you. Tiaan, we know Russell with Sakeliga. He's a very eminent economist who's now joined and is doing good work with you. Colleague of yours. You're on the legal side at Sakeliga. How long have you been with the organization?
Yeah, it's great working with people like Russell, and I've been at Sakeliga for 2 years, coordinating litigation and so on.
Okay,
and Tiaan's got a very important role. You know, we run several litigation cases at any one time, and it requires a lot of management internally. So playing a very important role because our litigation strategy has ramped up a lot, and there's a lot going on.
And right now, there's a really big one going on with the government. So let me just understand this first from a public's perspective, and then you can set me right. We had COVID-19. Whether or not it was as serious as people thought is irrelevant. There were rules that the government put in when the state of emergency or state of disaster had to finally come to an end in May. The government wanted to extend those rules and continue with those rules. But there's been a big problem in that because the extension of the rules could continue indefinitely. Is that true, Tiaan? Have I got it right there?
Well, the way that it's been promulgated at the moment, it is, for all practical purposes, indefinitely.
So we can wear masks for the rest of our lives if
Correct.
those laws continue.
If these regulations stand and withhold scrutiny. The Health Act regulations are, unlike the state of disaster regulations, made to last quite a long time until they are repealed. And there's no legislative limits on how long these regulations can be in place.
And the big things are 50% of venues or you only allowed 50% of the people in a venue. You have to show your vaccination certificate, even though some people aren't happy to have been vaccinated. I think something like only 30% of us have been vaccinated. But the reality about all of this is they could be here forever, these rules. And you don't like that, Russell, at Sakeliga.
We don't look, Alec, you're aware of our position throughout this whole lockdown period, this whole COVID period. We were very much against these hard blanket lockdowns that shut down economic activity. Those chickens are coming home to roost very much now, in several ways. And the unemployment crisis, the chronic job losses are still with us just from that episode, let alone we already had a bad unemployment problem. So we fought against onerous licensing requirements. During lockdown, we won there. So we are very much in favor of decentralized decision making, letting businesses make wise choices for their circumstances. It's a big country, lots of different kinds of people, different kinds of businesses. Everyone's facing different risk profiles. That's been our approach, and I think what we see in these regulations is, I think quite clearly, the desire to make permanent what were really emergency powers. I think abused and misused emergency powers, but nonetheless powers that needed to come to an end and essentially have come to an end, but now find expression in new and permanent laws. So we're very much opposed to this. We don't think businesses need nannying and need their hands held and told what to do and how to manage the risks that they face. So they're actually very capable of doing that at a local level. And when you try and centralize risk management like this, you create a tremendous amount of problems. The overarching issue here is allowing government to instrumentalize business through the policy mechanism to enforce what it wants enforced, and to kind of put very draconian rules on people. Now, some companies might not find this that onerous, okay, but some do, and it also sets a precedent of allowing the government to continue to impose very onerous restrictions and regulations on businesses.
So you've taken them to court?
We've taken them to court, and we've issued very long and substantial initial court papers. Tiaan can elaborate on some of that. And then last week we provided a supplementary papers, supplementary affidavits on analyzing the data that was provided to the government on all the submissions. So Tiaan can talk a little bit about the submissions process, but when regulations get announced, the public may now comment on that.
The public should comment on it because it's a democracy. Yeah.
And a lot of store is placed in that ostensibly, but I think what we're finding, and I think this is the key part of this conversation, is that it seems quite clear to us that government is going through the motions, and we don't think is not taking this process very seriously, and has in many ways turned it into a farce, and we'll get into that because those are strong claims.
So they are indeed, just to get to that part of this discussion, in discovery, in a court case, you have to see both sides of the both arguments, so that you go to court and you aren't blindsided. In the discovery process, if I understand it, you guys got access to, shall we call it the latest version of the Gupta leaks. It's almost like a health leaks, information that has come out of the health department that, when we were talking off air, you said are pretty shocking.
Yeah, indeed. So just for context, in a review application, when you review government decisions and you make certain assertions and you review certain decisions, they are obliged by the court rules to provide the record of decision making. Now, the rationale behind that is the government is in a unique position where they hold all the information. So it would be pretty futile going to courts and not having the information at hand that the government had before them when they made their decisions. So we obtained that through the court rules.
So let's just understand that. If a government's going to make a decision, they go through certain processes. They can't just decide on a whim to do things because they're elected by the people, etc. Is that really the philosophical process here?
Correct. So the government is, they have to put all their cards on the table and say, this is the decision that we took, or decisions in this case, and here are the records of decision making. And there are reasons for that, and it's also to be able to gauge whether the government took a rational decision, whether it was reasonable, etc. There are certain legality requirements when the government just take decisions, and the public needs to be able to gauge whether those decisions were made on a good basis.
Okay.
It's essentially about providing the minutes of the meeting.
Brilliant. And then also in this is that you open it up for comment from the public because, again, it's a democracy. How many comments were submitted in this particular case, given that they wanted to extend the COVID regulations into perhaps permanence?
Tiaan, we've counted about just over 300,000 submissions. So
that's active. Active citizenry.
Very active, and clearly, I think, a large number because it's a very emotive issue. The last 2 years have been emotional for a lot of people in all directions. So very strong participation. But what we've seen when we get those records is that we think that the analysis of those records by the government has been woefully deficient. 300,000 comments need to be taken seriously. They need to be analyzed. Now, thankfully, we live in 2022 where the technology exists to really go through those comments, to analyze them, to do word searches, to kind of categorize them. And we don't think this has been done even remotely appropriately.
Tell us more. Define it.
So there's several things that came up. The first is that it's clear that the department didn't have a methodology or the resources or capacity to process these comments. And that's probably why the Health Act gives 3 months for the public to deliver comments. They shortcut this process unilaterally to 1 month.
So hang on, it should take 3 months for comments.
Yes.
They cut it down to 1 month. Is that legal?
No, it's not, and it's part of the review proceedings now. The reason they did that was to replace the state of disaster on the 4th of May. But be that as it may, the issue with the commenting or the public participation
So hang on, it replaced the state of disaster. So that was expiring on the 4th of May. They wanted to continue with those regulations.
They didn't want a gap in the regulations, and they've essentially therefore short-circuited the comments period.
But why are these regulations so important to the government?
Well, I think they confer the bureaucrats in government with considerable rule-making power. They centralize decision-making, and we sit with a government, not just domestically, that likes these kind of bureaucratic powers. And so this is our big pushback. We, as I say, we need decentralized decision-making. So I think in the first instance, the comments process is now up for significant review. That's something that needs to be challenged. And then, of course, once you get into the actual comments data itself and looking at how they've handled these 300,000 comments, it's very problematic. Let Tion go into just some of the details on what we're finding there.
Yeah, what kind of problems did you see? Well, first of all, how many of the 300,000 submissions, given that they've compressed the period from 3 months to 1 month, how many of those 300,000 submissions were actually read?
Well, according to analysis we've done internally, at best 67% of submissions have actually been processed. That doesn't even get to being read or being considered. So we've dug further, and we found that of the 300,000 submissions, about 132. So
132,000.
No, 132.
132
comments were substantively considered. So that's
How do you
obviously
know
a
that?
minuscule.
How do you know that it's only 132?
Well, we've done an analysis. So
Of what?
So they have categorized comments into different spreadsheets. The first being obviously all of the comments that they've received, presumably. And then they have a separate spreadsheet where they put in the comments that they actually considered. So they've actually boxed these comments. They put it into different boxes, or based on whether they actually considered these comments.
So is it incompetence or is it willful neglect?
I think it's both.
But hang on, if you get 300,000 comments, you've processed 2/3 of them, or 200,000 of them, but you actually only look at 130 of them. 132, did you say?
Yes.
They may have looked at as many as 1,000, but out of that process, they really are only considering seriously just over 100. And even from that, they've kind of, there's a rejection process that they go through. We've found that they've rejected the validity of even these 132 comments for kind of spurious reasons, very, very suspect and biased reasons.
So this is their own information. You're not making this up. This is within the department. Where do you get this?
Okay,
this stuff.
So they've by court order have had to give us records of decision making. This expresses in things like Excel spreadsheets, where they are now processing and listing and commenting on the data themselves and kind of sorting through it. And we're able to, as best we can ascertain, see that they are only considering seriously maybe 70 comments after the 130 after they've rejected some. So we're really talking about, I think, in many ways, a bit of a farcical process here. Let's also just say, and this is very important, that of the 300,000 comments, we've done proper analysis of that. We've taken a random sample of 500 comments, which is a statistically significant sample of the 300,000. We've replicated that analysis as well later with a sample of 1,000. Assigned them random numbers and come up with a random sample of the comments. Alec, the comments are overwhelmingly against the regulations. We're not talking 60-40 here. We're talking 97% against these health regulations. And I think, we can talk about what that number means and where that number comes from.
I'm getting a picture here. So you offer you want to do these regulations. You say, by law, you as the public, our constituency, you're allowed to comment. 300,000 people take the time, or 300,000 comments are then submitted. But they're 97% against what you want to see, so you don't bother processing them. Is that what the conclusion that you guys are going to present before the court?
So what we've presented in our affidavit is, first and foremost, the department doesn't seem to have possess the know-how and the capacity to deal with that volume of comments. It shouldn't be that difficult in 2022. The technology we have to assess large volumes of text and submissions is actually eminently available. So in the first instance, it's not equipped to do that. So incompetence clearly on on display. In the second instance, we can see very clearly, and this comes also through in comments and in various emails that have been sent within the department, that there is a kind of a disdain for the process and for people's opinion on this. Comments are accepted if they're kind of willing to go along with the narrative. And there are, several organizations, Tiaan can maybe pull them up, whose comments have either been not read or fleetingly considered and just ignored. Sakeliga, being one, and we've put in very thoughtful commentary.
How long was it
on these regulations? Our comment. Well, our comment was a few pages long, but very thoughtful, very substantive,
and probably not read. Is this what you're saying? From what you can see, what the department have recorded,
either
internally.
not read or glanced over and discarded because it's negative.
Were there other organizations like Sakeliga, Tiaan, who you've seen now by going through the department's own records, who've also had this kind of treatment?
Yeah, Dear South Africa, which is one of the biggest public participation platforms in the country. We had the likes of the South African Medical Council. They've had the same treatment as us. The South African Dental Council, Military Council. So we picked up 21 significant organizations, legal experts, and medical professionals who submitted comments, and they were simply glossed over, not read, just rejected.
Maybe to close off a little, a fish always rots from the top. There's a guy called Dr. Nicholas Crisp. His name comes up a lot. I think he's the Deputy Director General, Department of Health. Was there anything in this data dump, that showed his approach towards this? Was he perhaps a little bit more above board, a little bit more, or focused more on trying to get to the right solution here?
Well, his name did come up quite a few times when we analyzed the record, and we found that he harbored a particularly contemptuous attitude towards the public participants. There are a few emails between himself and members of that Department of Health, where submissions are being treated very disdainfully. For instance, one submission was kind of rejected on the basis that the particular organization who submitted it wanted to make the public sick of COVID again. So there's stuff like that coming up. And then there's also a member of the task team who went through these comments, who was tasked with considering it, who alleged that organizations submitting comments and submissions on the regulations are instigating terrorism against the state. So these are the kind of things that we've picked up.
Picked up from, again, getting back to how big is this data dump that you've had to work through so far?
Well, it's about 20 gigabytes.
20 gigs.
Yes.
That's substantial. That's like Gupta leak size.
There's a lot in there. There's a lot of information in there.
How much of it have you processed?
Well, I think we've probably just scratched the surface. I mean, we've certainly, on the comments side, we've done thorough analysis of the comments. There's more than just comments and more than just Excel files. There's records of emails that are legitimate, public records. And I think what we see from someone like Nicholas Crisp, again, I think this is a theme that goes back through the last 2 years, is a government and government departments that are acting above the population, that are getting advice only insofar as it goes along with their narrative. The Ministerial Advisory Committee has been ignored in this process, whereas 2 years ago they were being listened to. But it seems as though the common thread through all that is that if you tell the government what they want to hear on these decisions, that's great. You get listened to. But if you differ with them, they're going to go against you. And I think this whole process just smacks of going through the democratic motions of getting the submissions in, tick the box, but at the end of the day, do what you want to do. But it's hard to argue with 97%, Alec.
It is indeed. So you're now going to be bringing or holding these guys to account, hoisted by their own petard, I suppose, in a way, because you got that 20 gigs of information that the court has, that you forced the court, you forced them through the courts to give you. Does this now be part of your submission in the next court hearing? Where does it go from here?
It is already finds expression in a very substantive supplementary affidavit that's been filed last week. So that's now on record. That I think will make very interesting reading for people. So we can perhaps make that available. But and that beefs up our set of arguments, along with the other applicants, as we move to our court date late July.